Welcome, everyone. My name is Lori Berman. I'm Vice President of Membership and Development for the Small Business Association of Michigan. Thank you for joining us today. A special presentation on digital marketing, a great topic that many of us are anxious to hear today. Before we get started, a couple items of housekeeping. Welcome to those that are joining us on Facebook and also on Zoom. Today's webinar will be recorded on both. You'll be able to see it later on Facebook and also on Zoom. And if you'd like to share it with others, it will live in perpetuity on the SBAM website as well. Today, I will be monitoring questions through the question and answer feature of Zoom. If you have questions on Facebook, please go ahead and post those on the feed. We're watching those as well. If you have questions that are not related to today's topic and it's something else, whether it be PPP forgiveness, send those to sbam@sbam.org and help us to keep today's content focused on digital marketing. Let me tell you a little bit about today's speaker, Chip LaFleur. Chip is president of LaFleur Marketing. He is an entrepreneur, an organizational leader, and digital marketing strategist who combines experience in web development, marketing tactics, team leadership. He has a strong ability to harness talent and hone complex concepts in concrete deliverables. I've had the chance to speak with Chip a couple of times, very engaging. Chip is a fairly new member of SBAM, and we're really happy to have him here and learn more about his talent and his expertise. So I will let you take it away, Chip, and share slides. I will monitor questions, and we'll get to those towards the end.
That sounds great. Thanks so much, Lori. I appreciate it. And for the record, I did not write that bio. That was somebody else. I don't sound like that in real life. But thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. I appreciate being able to be a part of this and share some information here. So we already met me, so I don't think we need to talk too much more about who I am. We'll just kind of dive right into the materials here. And so, what we wanted to do was kind of put together as much information as we could share that we thought would be relevant to this audience in the time that we have. So we're going to go kind of quickly through this, but we're going to start with the basics, right? So at the baseline, when we think of marketing for a small business or for an organization, the first thing that we think of is the personality, the brand. Like who are you, and why should someone engage with you in what you're doing and choose to hire you or choose to purchase your products? And so when we go through kind of a branding process, we start to ask questions like the ones that are listed here. What are we really good at? Who do we want to service? Who do we want to work with? Who do we want to sell to? We start to kind of create these personas of who that potential customer is. And that includes the feeling that they get when they work with you, when they walk out the door. What do they think of you? What's that first impression? A lot of times people think of branding as your logo, your fonts and your colors. And of course, those things are a large part of that. But those things should really be a reflection of your personality, of the personality of the business. And so this is an example of something that we do for a lot of our clients, which is, this kind of brand standards guidebook. And we see this as really kind of that foundational piece. Now, you don't necessarily need to work with an agency to build something like this, but you do need to start to ask yourself kind of those questions of who you are, and really why do you do the thing that you do. We think of like a core purpose to our organization, and that should be the thing that really causes you to get up and get out of bed. And if you can come up with that core purpose, and maybe somewhere between 3 and 5 or 6, core values as to what defines your business, you can then start to build on those things. It is helpful to have someone kind of walk through that with you. And in Michigan, we have some wonderful resources that can help with that. But then those things start to define some of the visuals, right? And so when we think of, when we look at this example here, we really wanted to have kind of the warmth, compassion, empathetic approach to what we do. And you can see how that impacts the photography. And we're not going to get into the language here, but, we write a message and we write about real people who are going to interact with this brand. And what that does for you, beyond just being an exercise, what that does is it gives you the tools to really connect with your audience. And we find that, we'll talk about content marketing a little bit later, but we find that when we can speak to a specific audience, a specific person even, we talk a little bit differently just in conversation. And we certainly write a little bit differently. If we're writing an email to an individual, or if we're writing an email that goes out to a large group, we tend to approach that differently. But, as humans, we like that human connection. And so when we can kind of define what some of those personas are that interact with the brand, we can really speak to them more effectively. So this example here, again, is a law firm. It happens to be in Texas. But in the legal space, especially in the personal injury space, that audience is incredibly diverse, and it's really one of the more diverse entities and organizations out there in terms of who their audience is. But we're still able to kind of define those personalities and kind of create that feeling, that personality. So we're speaking to those people instead of just broadly to a brand. So of course the logo is part of that, colors are a part of that, but all of those things kind of spring up from that early stage. And so when we think of that, brand wise, we look at this process, this kind of sales funnel, um, you know, that runs from left to right, around awareness, interest, consideration, intake, sign up, or sales, onboarding, depending on the type of organization, that would be onboarding or a closed sale. And then all the things that happen after that, your audience that you've worked with, the people that know you that you've worked with, those are your best sources of referrals. And so we really want that brand to have consistent touch points throughout this entire funnel. And again, this is meant to just be an example. Every industry is going to be a little bit different. But above are some of the things that can be done on the digital side. Below are some of the things that are going to be a little bit more brick and mortar, or a little bit more boots on the ground. But as we think of that brand, like that language and that structure and those kind of key selling points need to be present throughout each of those things. Now with COVID, we've seen some things. We've seen consumer expectations shift a little bit. And that has a direct impact in what that type of messaging and what type of activities are better perceived by a potential audience. And I think this is applicable across most industries. What people have grown to appreciate has really come to be, informational content. And that's not new going into COVID, but that's increased in importance. Um, People are less inclined to be interested in something that is just, a normal advertising campaign. You can see 52% of people, strongly or somewhat approve of that, whereas 85% want to see that practical educational information. They also want to see organizations that are willing to step up to the plate and try to help their community. As business leaders in our community, we have this unique opportunity to really take a look at all of our services, all of our team. If we've built something, then how can we leverage that to try to help in the community? And so we can see that 83% of respondents here on this survey, and this is a worldwide survey, but we're looking specifically at some at this, which is applicable here in the U.S. But pledging money, aid, and supplies to help people. What we've been able to do as an organization, and what we've made a point to do, is we take a half a day every month. And instead of work, our team, as many people as we can, we go and do a volunteer effort. And the volunteer effort is chosen by people on our team. So we submit requests, and then we choose those requests, and we do that every month. And we're a 6-year-old business. We're a relatively small organization. We have mid-20s in terms of employees, but we're able to do that even at this stage. And even, we had a little bit of time that we weren't able to do that because of COVID, but now we're back at it again. And the value there, of course, comes from the perception of your brand and things like that, but it runs deeper than that. And it's something that we're really passionate about. Our team loves to do that. We love to be involved in the community. We make connections in the community. And it's really, it's a win-win situation for everyone that's involved. So behavioral changes coming again from Global Web Index is the source of this data. Anticipated consumer behavioral changes. So shopping online, of course, more frequently. if you're an organization that sells a product and you've primarily been brick and mortar, there is no time like now to make sure that you have an online presence for that as well. Where we've seen a huge uptick is exercising at home as well. So we work with some organizations that work in the education sector of movement, of physical movement, and we've seen just an explosion of interest in that sector. And kind of right on down this list, and what I see this list as is a roadmap for us. Those of us who are in business, this is a roadmap of the things that we should be paying some attention to. So no matter what the organization type is, some of these things are going to impact us. We need to make sure that we have the technology and the tools to successfully navigate this. And then another thing that corresponds to our brand is the external perception and the communication provided from others about our brand itself. Now, if we've done a good job building that brand and maintaining that, then those responses should largely be positive. And so we could see 96% said reviews played a role in a purchase decision. This was from 2015, so this is a few years old. 49% said reviews are very important. So we're seeing some strange things happen with Amazon, especially where there are fake reviews out there. So, as a purchaser, you're going to want to use something like FakeSpot or a service like that to verify that those reviews are legitimate. But this is a reflection of your brand from the consumer side. So this is a great opportunity to kind of measure and say, what do people think about us? How effective has our messaging been? And also, I think that this is a key takeaway here is that if we don't have a mechanism to show people our reviews, we need to think about what that strategy is going to look like. So that kind of, once we have that brand defined and once we think about kind of how we are perceived, then we want to move into the application of that brand and in the things that we do. And so, the starting point of that for many organizations is going to be the website. And our approach to looking at a website is kind of focused in these two areas, in functionality and findability. Your website can be amazing. It can be beautiful. The design and the appearance of that website ties in with that functionality. So we don't want something that's so artistic and creative that the user doesn't know what to do. We want it to be functional, and that functional should incorporate, outstanding design, and it should impress the user that comes to see that. But it being findable is also a key element here. So if you build a wonderful site and it looks great, but it loads slowly, and it doesn't do what you expect it to do, it's not going to show up in search. People aren't going to find you, and then it doesn't have any real value. So we want to focus on those two things here. So starting point, most organizations have a site already, they have a domain already, but we still talk to new businesses, things like that are in the process of creating this. So of course we need to buy a domain. I like to use Namecheap myself, but many people use GoDaddy and other providers there. There are decisions that we can make around hosting. So basic hosting, managed hosting, we can get hosting through GoDaddy, through Bluehost, and through some providers like that. Or we can go through something like a WP Engine. And the difference there is that in the first instance, we're going to get some pretty basic hosting. They're not going to do anything for us to make sure our site stays healthy and good. We don't have that fallback. With managed hosting, we're going to have support. We're going to have nightly backups. The speed is usually going to be faster. They're going to be designed specifically to host that. Photography and imagery is hugely important for a website, of course. It ties into the design itself. And then the management system. So we will see newer organizations start out with something like a Wix or a Squarespace, and that has its advantages. It's very quick to get up. It's very inexpensive, but it doesn't have a lot of flexibility. And so we prefer to use a content management system like WordPress, Drupal. We're doing some work in Laravel right now, which is not necessarily a content management system, but it's something that is buildable. And when we use a system like that, it's going to land kind of in that perfect balance point between being serviceable by the business, by someone employed by the business, not necessarily a developer, but also scalable, and it's going to help inform that findability piece because it's going to work more effectively usually with search. And then when we start to build a site, and if this is something that you're looking at doing, we start out with that sitemap to say, here are the pages that we need. When we build a site, we use a variety of different plugins. We use plugins for load time. Again, this kind of speaks to the value of a content management system that's established, is that many of the things that you think about that you want on your site have been built already. And so you don't need to build them from scratch. Depending on what you're building, that usually is advantageous. SSL certificates, again, that speaks to that managed hosting platform. If you have that, that's going to be very easy. And then I'm going to kind of skip through this, but site responsiveness, make sure you have a contact form, make sure you have a mechanism to reach out and do the thing that you want. Responsiveness speaks to the speed of the site, and then make sure that you have Google Analytics installed. And I would make the case, I would argue, I should say, if you're a business owner, then you should have Google Analytics installed, and you should at least know how to get to it and look at some of the basic reporting. And that analytics reporting is relatively simple to use, but it's one of those tools that you can use as a business owner to make sure that you are safe, and that you're getting what your expectations are. For some ongoing things, chat option is a very readily available piece now. There's platforms like Olark. We like SharpSpring for a variety of things. It also includes chat, Apex Chat, Engage. They run this gamut of managed versus non-managed. And then managed is going to be just basically a complete outsourcing of your chat until they determine that this is a potential client. And so it's a great way to engage with your audience, and start that conversation. And then I just want to speak a little bit about Core Web Vitals. We'll get into that in detail, but it's a changing thing. We'll talk about that here in a minute. And then ADA compliance. Recently there was a lawsuit that made its way to the Supreme Court, that involved, basically it was a lawsuit to say, hey, there are individuals who are unable to use this specific app, and so it's the responsibility of that organization to make that usable. Now, most small businesses don't need to worry about getting sued for accessibility issues for their website at this point in time. I think that over time that will increase. But also there's a large portion of the population that is unable to interact with a website in the way that the rest of the population are. People who are visually impaired, who can't see, a number of other things. It's a huge audience. And so it just makes great business sense to be accessible to that audience. We touched on Google Analytics. This is just a basic view, but as you can see, from this basic view, you can see how many individuals, how many people are coming to your site. You can see how they flow through the site. You can categorize users based on their behavior. So we can go from very simple to more complex. But as a business owner or someone who's interested in the visibility of their site and their brand, at least have access to this tool. And if your site is being built by an agency or by a developer, just insist that you have this. And then also key here is make sure that you or someone in the organization is the owner. Usually that should be someone who's a principal. You can add managers, but don't give up the ownership, because if that gets lost, then it's very hard to replicate, and that historic data is hugely important. So Core Web Vitals, this sounds like it's more complex probably than it is, but this speaks to the ability to find a site. And so Google has somewhere north of 200 ranking factors that they consider when determining how visible a site should be in search. And they're usually pretty tight-lipped about sharing what that is with us. And so they like to not tell us exactly what those things are. We can use experiments, and there's a lot of legacy data that we can look at and find out what those are. Once in a while, Google says, hey, we're going to roll out a new ranking factor, and you should pay attention. And we take the messaging very seriously from them, because they keep this so kind of tight to their chest. It's hard for us to see that. So when they do tell us, what they're communicating is, this is probably going to be pretty impactful. And so in May of this year, they made an announcement that Core Web Vitals are going to be a determining factor in your visibility in search, or they're going to contribute to that. And so what this really speaks to is how your site loads, when it becomes interactive, and the visual stability. So we've all gone onto a site, and as it's loading, we think we're going to click on a button, and then the button moves. It's not there anymore because it shifts. Google wants to ensure that we have a positive experience on whatever result they deliver. And so if we're having an experience like that, we're less likely to use it. Google thinks, well, maybe they're going to be less likely to use Google. It's a little bit of a stretch, but we want to take this really seriously going forward. And this is probably going to involve a little bit of work, depending on how your site is built, the platform, how old it is. It could be more or less. But some things to hand over to your developer if you're not doing this yourself. Third-party scripts, they tend to build up over time. Your web host is going to have an impact. How fast are their servers? Lazy loading, that just means making especially visual elements and content load when you scroll instead of loading with the page. Huge page elements, some of this gets a little bit technical, but your developer, if you have one, is going to understand what this is. And so that speaks to the LCP. This is the first input delay. So minimizing JavaScript, again, scripts, using browser cache, that's going to help you with that. Google has defined these parameters. Some things to minimize for content shift, to set your dimensions for the media and have them stay that size. Now that's going to be dependent on the browser, but you should be able to communicate that. If you have add elements, make sure they have a reserved space. Again, we don't want things to move around. And add new user interface elements that below the fold. So the fold is going to be what you see on the screen, and then as you scroll, that moves you past the fold. And so, it is possible to make some pretty dramatic improvements here. And so what we're finding for a lot of our clients, of course, this wasn't an issue a year ago. So now we're making changes and we're rolling out new changes. This is a tool that is accessible to anyone. It's called Google PageSpeed Insights. I never bookmark the page. I just type PageSpeed Insights into Google whenever I want to go to it. And then you just type in your URL. And when you type in that URL, it's going to tell you exactly what needs improvement down here at the bottom. So there's lab data, first contentful paint, time to interactive, and cumulative layout shift. Those 3 data points are what you want to pay the most attention to. So the top 2 and the bottom 1 on the right there. So now you have a website all set up and you think, well, we launched it, everything is good in the world, and we can stop. Unfortunately, that's not the case because Google doesn't care that your site is beautiful, that it loads fast, and that it talks about your company. So we need to drive people to the site. So one of the chief tools, one of the primary tools that we tend to use there is a content marketing strategy. And so the reason there is because people want to engage with informative content. And we saw that when we were talking about people's shift going into COVID. And that's not a huge shift because people have always wanted to interface with good quality content that educates and communicates things that they want to learn. And they want to do that far more so than they want to be sold something. And so what we do is we create a content marketing plan. That content marketing plan helps people to learn about the things that are important in your world. And so it does that a lot more so than it does help them to learn about your business directly. But what we want to do is we want to be established as kind of a thought leader in that space, is the best option. If it's a product, the best option to buy. So we tie that in with organic search, and what we tend to see, and the way kind of we refer to that, we hear about SEO and organic search a lot. Organic search becomes almost like a secondary benefit to a good content marketing plan. And so if we really pursue this effectively and we do a good job with our content and make that educational and informative, then we are going to consistently see improved traffic to our site. There are things that still belong under that category of SEO, but we like to use that content marketing approach, which has shown just incredible growth year over year. Again, this is an example of a law firm same firm down in Texas. But by effectively applying this strategy of educating and informing the audience that you understand, we see consistent growth year after year. And sometimes that growth is exponential. It may not be that every year, but you should see a very, very consistent growth. Again, the folks at Google have given us some information about how to approach that content. And so we'll get into kind of how to structure this and hold yourself accountable to do this. But what some of the folks at Google have put together, are some of these key elements here. And so, they want your content to be original and engaging. They want it to answer your questions. Good content and content marketing strategy should have a really tight focus on a single query, a single search that somebody's going to do. And again, when we talked about that persona as we're looking at the brand, we want to speak to that person more so than we want to speak to a more general audience. And so that's going to mean at least having a basic understanding of, reading level, some demographic data, where people live, what their habits are. The more we can understand about our audience, the more effective this language and this communication is going to be. As you do this, again, this demonstrates your expertise. This gives you an opportunity to show the world instead of telling them. So you can show them that you understand your vertical better than anybody else out there. And you do that by, instead of saying, we understand this better than everybody else out there, you do this by putting together information that resonates with your audience. They read it, and now they automatically think that you're the person who knows. And we like that content to include citations, references, data points. We like it to be real. In years past, people would try to kind of game the system in search, and that's where this whole SEO industry really kind of started out. Now, the best approach is to be authentic and to actually do it. Now, that does require a little bit more work, but the results are less inclined to be negatively impacted by Google's algorithm updates, for example. So, this is how we approach this. This is kind of how our process is. There's no reason that any organization can't take this and replicate it. I like to think we do a very good job with it. But if we follow this approach, we're going to see better results than if we don't do it. So an editorial calendar is hugely important. We'll look in the details of that in the next slide. But that incentivizes us. It creates accountability to create the content. Good content, again, is going to be more in depth, so it's probably going to be a little bit longer. We really like 800 plus. We tend to go closer to 1,000, 1,500 now. Google's watching very closely the cadence of the posts. And so they want to see you post it at least a couple times a month. We've seen kind of the biggest value for the time is at about once a week. So just a little over 4 times a month. Keyword research should inform what we're writing about. We want to focus on what are called long tail keywords, and those are going to be keywords and phrases really that that are like asking a question, for example. So we have an example of one of those pieces here. What should I bring to a meeting with an injury lawyer? We know when people are looking for an injury lawyer, they're asking a question like that. And so we're able to rank very well for a phrase like that because we understand the audience. We know they're asking that question, and we're able to answer that question in an informative way. For most of our content, we focus on about an 8th or 9th grade reading level. Don't try to sound too smart unless you're working with university faculty. We have a client that does that. We change our tone and we adjust that up. But for most purposes, 8th or 9th grade reading level is going to be where you want to be. Editorial calendar. So this is kind of the key to making all of this happen. If you're going to take this on in-house, then start here, assign this as a project to somebody in-house and say, we need an editorial calendar, and the editorial calendar is going to assign the responsibility to create this content to individuals. And so we want to have a deadline. We want to have an author assigned to the person. Working title. Now that working title can change as we write the content. Where it's going to go. So is it going to go on your site? Is it going to go, on somebody else in your industry? Where is it going to live? A status column that says, hey, this started, this needs to be edited, this is ready to publish. The keyword that you're focusing on, so this is going to keep your focus back to that so that you've got your title, your working title at least, and you have the keyword target. So you're going to write about that in particular. You do want to have a call to action. So what is the thing? So when people read this article, what is the thing that you want them to do? You don't want to devote the entirety or the majority of the article to that, but you do want to lead them in the direction that you want. And then any notes, are there any data points that you really want to include and focus on? Now, along with that, that kind of speaks to the written content, but this can be used on the video side too. Especially with COVID coming into play, people have been more and more inclined to make use of video, and people are more willing to consume video on the consumer side. And so it's a huge percentage of the traffic on the web. Of course, it's increasing significantly as time goes on. So these data points come from Cisco. This is a couple of years ago. So we're seeing increasing viability here as well. One of the strange things that has come about as we've gone through COVID is that people more and more are watching video with audio on. So it was kind of a rule of thumb that, people scrolling through Facebook, they leave their audio on. They don't hit the audio key on the video. Same thing with LinkedIn, same for Instagram. But with COVID, and the reasons, of course, we don't know. We just know the behavior. My hypothesis is that people aren't in an office anymore. And so if they're working from home or working remote and they have their audio on, then it improves their experience. And so as people are kind of in this circumstance, we've seen video with audio perform significantly better, which is a pretty dramatic change. So now we create all that content and we set it on our website. And again, we think, well, now everybody's going to just show up, and that's wonderful if they do. But it also helps to try to broadcast that out to a larger audience. Unfortunately, we have a lot of tools to do that. Industry-wise, there's going to be specific areas where you have an opportunity to post that. Of course, Facebook, Google My Business, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, Vimeo. The list is endless. And so here too, we want to incorporate this in the editorial calendar or have a separate editorial calendar for social media. If you've already done a good job creating this content in the first place, then you have pre-built posts. And so you could post, those content pieces. We like the rule of thirds. So the rule of thirds as it pertains to social media, a third about your organization, a third about the community that you're in, and a third about like your content, like what did you create? We want to use all the elements that we have available at our disposal. So plain text posts, graphics, pictures, videos. If you can apply a little design element to that, that's great. A question that we often get is what should we do about comments? Generally, unless those comments are, are offensive or includes private details, we want to delete those. But otherwise, we want to keep them out there, even if they're negative, and we want to respond to those in an appropriate way. So when we do an effective job on the organic side, we should see an increase in traffic. So we should see people engaging with that content. We should see an increase in leads because, again, this is your opportunity to communicate directly to your audience. And the other thing that happens is you tend to get more and more visibility in search. And so that's a combination of your content, which we want Google to think is very valuable. And then also the way that you broadcast that. Every time you push something out there, you create more links back to it. Google sees that, they measure that, and they say, hey, this is another thing that we should be looking at here. So KPIs around that, how much traffic are you driving? How much of that traffic is converting and becoming a client or at least a lead? What's your bounce rate? So the bounce rate is going to come from Google Analytics generally, and it's going to tell you how many people come onto one page and then don't continue on. That's going to give you some indications as to whether or not you should change your navigation structure, add elements within your content to get people to click through to another page on your site. Once they find your site, we want to keep them there for as long as we can. Bounce rate tells us if we're doing a good job of that or not. And then time on page, that tells us something else. Time on page tells us how engaged is that user with the content that you created. So how much time are they spend reading it? If it's a couple seconds, and and we can look and see how they got there, then that's an indicator that we might not be doing a great job there. The other thing that can be telling us is if we're using advertising, if we're using media, we might not be doing a great job with that. One of the things that we see very commonly when we start working with an organization that's been doing some digital marketing is, on their display campaigns, they do not exclude app advertising, which we almost entirely, almost 100% recommend not doing, because when you're advertising on apps, unless you're very particular about which apps you're advertising on, you're going to see a tremendous amount of traffic come through kid games. And so what these publishers do is they recognize that when a little kid gets a hold of somebody's phone, they're going to want to play a game, and they're going to click on anything. And so time on page actually can be indicative of whether or not this is happening. So if you see that you have a source of a digital campaign for the traffic, the time on page is, between 2 and 10 seconds, you want to go and check and make sure that you're not serving ads on a kid game on a phone, because that's probably not going to be very valuable traffic and you're paying for it. On social media KPIs, we want to look at impressions and reach. Those things have value. The most important, though, I think, is engagement. So how many people are actually liking, sharing, or commenting on your content? That's probably your best indicator as to whether or not you're doing a good job on that front, or if you're working with somebody, whether or not they're doing a good job. So this leads us into automation. Automation really is a mechanism to take user behavior and build out automated responses. And so when we think of say a business to business team, we know that we are limited to a certain number of salespeople. Those salespeople have a certain amount of time in a given day, but we really want to provide increased attention to especially those higher value leads. And so we know that based on Nucleus research, a 14.5% increase in sales productivity when using automation. So automation is going to fire emails at just the right time. It's going to provide customization and dynamic content in those emails. So you're still going to be using people's names. You're going to be using what you know about them. And so automation is going to allow us to do that. And then on the other side, the 63%, they're speaking to the ability that automation gives us to understand that user behavior and measure the success of that. So we're going to use user tracking to understand which pieces we're engaged with, which ones resonate, which ones don't, and that helps us make decisions about what we should do more or less of. So 86%, improved lead nurturing. We like to spend a lot of time thinking about the middle section here of this image. So data collection, we get a lead, they self-identify one way or another, we segment them. Oftentimes there's this space and time between that lead generation. Even if we have a very aggressive sales team, there's going to be this period of time where the sales team can't reach them, they haven't returned a call. We have this opportunity to nurture them and to help them grow. Automation helps us to do that. And so, here again, 20% increase in sales opportunities versus non-nurtured, 451% increase in qualified leads. So this automation is going to allow us to apply lead scoring, for example, to say, hey, if this person matches a fit, or if this lead matches a fit, we can add points for that. And then if they also match this engagement model, then we understand that this is a very valuable lead. Now we can prioritize our communication to that lead over another one who may not show the same indicators. And what that's going to do for our sales team is going to allow them to speak to the highest value prospects that are most likely to come in. And that's why we see such a huge jump, and if we could come up with something that's going to increase our business by 20%, I think we jump on it. 451% is just wild. This speaks to the automation side too. So when we have this data, when we're building this database, and again, there are a number of ways to do this. We like SharpSpring. There's Marketo, there's Pardot, Marketing Cloud, Acton, HubSpot is probably one of the more popular out there. So there's many ways to get there. But when we have this data, we can now really personalize that journey. And we could do that all the way to addressing that user by name when they show up on your website. We want to maintain that data, in an ethical way, but we want to build that database, and we can see the results here, from what some of the things that Dell has done. 70% increase in click-through rates, 300% higher conversion rates. There's a tremendous amount of value here. So we use some of these metrics here, so we weigh them differently. But when we measure that performance, conversion rate is the most important. Revenue generated obviously is right up there too. Leads, engagement, When we look down this list, as we go towards the bottom, these are indicators that they may have less value to the measurement, but they have value in helping us understand if the tactics are working. So if we know that that nurture process is a 6-month process, we can look at open and click rate and cost per lead, and that's going to help us determine if our entire process is working effectively even before we get to that finish line. So a large part of automation, of course, is email marketing. So KPIs there, we want to look at open rate, how many people open it, how many people click through your link. Once they do that, how many bounce, just view that page or view something else, and then list growth rate. So with the increase in spam happening across the internet, especially post-COVID or in the midst of COVID, what we've seen is that companies that offer this sort of service have started to really tighten down and say, hey, if your users aren't engaging with this content that you're sending, we're gonna pull back on the send. Basically, we're gonna suppress the send. So what that means is on the other side, we always need to be trying to build those lists, grow them, and make sure they're healthy. So now if we have those things in place, we can look at some other mechanisms to drive traffic to our site. So we love organic search, of course, because once we get it, we don't continue to pay for every single click, and that makes it that provides for the most exponential growth that's possible. But usually hand in hand with that, we want to do some paid advertising. So we like to kind of start by understanding what's trending. So what are people looking for as it pertains to our business? And so this is a tool that's available to everybody. Again, we can just type in Google search trends, and then we can ask Google, hey, what do you see trending up or trending down? Now, this is a scale of 1 to 100. This is not going to tell us the exact volume, but we can see when things really peak. And so, of course, going into end of March, beginning of April, everybody was searching for fabric face masks. They were looking for patterns. They were looking for places to buy it, that huge spike. When we see that, or when we see something like grocery delivery, start to increase, that can have an impact on the decisions that we make about what we're going to pursue for our business. And, at no time in my memory has there been so much volatility. But with that volatility, if we're forward thinking as an organization and as a business, then we can look at the volatility, and if we can get ahead of that, then we can adjust our business to address that. So, for example, the grocery stores that prioritized a delivery service have done disproportionately better than those that said, hey, we're going to try to wait this out. Now, it doesn't mean that there's always a way to foresee that in the future, but Google Trends gives us at least a tool to try to see when that's starting to go up and down. And if we do the search right, it also will give us a prediction about future behavior as well. As we've gone through COVID, we've seen some trends move around. So, some of these are unfortunate to see, but we saw divorce attorney searches increase significantly. Again, if we're in a family law practice, then that should give us an indicator that, hey, we should probably increase our marketing spend if we're going to capture some of this marketing share. Accident searches actually decreased. And so we had fewer people on the roads for a little while. We had fewer car accidents, one of the few positives to come out of this. We've seen estate planning conversions increase significantly because, of course, people are saying, hey, what if something happens to me? I need to make sure that, my affairs are in order. So looking at those things, again, if this is an area that you're comfortable in AdWords, or if you're working with an agency, ask what those trends are, because those trends should inform what you choose to spend on. So a lot of different movements going around here for different variables, but you need to be aware of what those variables are if you're going to use your budget effectively. I'm going to speed up here a little bit because we have a handful of things to get through and we want to leave some time for questions. But, one of the things that we have seen as we went into COVID was we had clients who pulled back on their spend. Surprisingly, that coincided very specifically with a drop in visibility in search. Google says they don't do that, but we have seen that happen now. So we know that that's a thing. So we want to be careful making fast changes, and align with that. When we do start down that path of running ads, doing search, it's not the flip of a switch. Traction from those ads can take months. We should start seeing results at about the 6-month mark. But what's usually going to happen is you're going to start out with a higher cost per, and then every month you should see a decrease until you get down to kind of the basement. And then that's where you want to stay. So the decision there, of course, you have to make decisions and understand what you're getting into. But when you make a decision to look at digital marketing, especially on the paid side, I think one of the key takeaways is it has to be a long-term, you have to be willing for the long-term investment. It's not going to work in the first 3 months. So KPIs, all of these things are important. I think the most important here is the cost per conversion. And so as you're getting conversions, how much did each one cost? And are you getting good clients, good sales, good leads out of that process? So all of these are important. The most important is going to be cost per conversion. I want to spend just a few minutes talking about security as it pertains to our world on the digital side. 60% of small businesses that are the victim of an attack, they go out of business within 6 months, which is a very scary statistic. The number one, and I know this doesn't have too much to do with marketing, but it does in some ways, and we'll get into that. But the number one risk that a business has when it comes to security is people, unfortunately. Human error. Some are due to human error. Most involve a malicious attack. So keeping our team trained is very important. So we use a platform called KnowBe4. There are many others out there. These are relatively non-invasive training and testing systems that allow you to run tests, test your employees, and see how they do. And this can literally save you millions of dollars. Now, the thing that I would add to this is if you're working with any third-party organization and they have access to any of your data, then it is vital that you ask them what their approach to digital security is as well. Because if you have your own world locked up tight and you work with a third party and they do not, then you're taking risks outside of your own world. And so that is very applicable to working with a marketing agency or with an individual or even in-house. Most organizations are going to have a database of clients, client contact information. If that gets breached, then you are subject to all sorts of issues and potential liabilities. So I always recommend speak to your insurance agent, make sure that you have specific coverage for something like this. And then also implement one of these tools, and again, you can look up and find others. Your IT provider can help you with that. But today, especially in COVID, those attacks have increased dramatically. And they come from, using weak passwords. They come from having passwords stolen. They come from having sticky notes. And what's really changed now is we as business owners or leaders in our space, we don't have full control over that environment. So that means that people are accessing the internet through their home router. Home routers just don't have the security that that we're going to get from an IT provider. Some other data points there to point that out. The number one tool that we have, though, at our disposal is multi-factor authentication. If you're on Office 365, if you're in Google Apps, if you're using, a password storage system like LastPass, which is what we use, make sure you have multi-factor authentication. You're going to get a little message on your phone and you hit accept and you're in. And so this can block almost just under 100% of issues. So again, we'll just kind of zip through this here. So we like to talk about a few different models for your marketing, getting out there, doing it yourself. If you can go through these things and implement some of these things, grab your social media platform, all of them, brand them, create some automation. We've got MailChimp, Constant Contact, Emma. They're all user-friendly. And so if you're starting out, then go that route and claim those things and get some of these things in motion. Of course, it's going to take up some of your time. Is this the thing that you're good at? Can you fit it in your schedule? Can you pull in an intern to help you with some of this stuff? There's a path there, and that makes sense, especially when we're getting started, getting out of the gate. We always love it when we work with organizations that have in-house staff as well. This is not like you have to choose one path. Having someone in-house who can really own this gives you an opportunity to gives you an opportunity to have someone again be really accountable for this program, for the programs that you use. You know, there are some costs involved in hiring a team, or hiring a person. There's also this restriction of, if you hire someone who's an excellent writer, they're probably not an outstanding designer. If they're a great designer and writer, they're still probably not, you know, a great developer. And so there is value in kind of that, in some of that agency model there, which I don't spend too much time talking about, but you know, you do get that mix of, you have your writers, you have your social media, you have your media buyers, your developers, all of that kind of built to provide that. And then very quickly, if you do work with an agency, you know, make sure that they're committed to you in a long-term relationship instead of project-based. You know, that's one of the reasons I started LaFleur was, you know, I didn't want to see that project-based with no accountability model continue on. So look for that long-term relationship, ask for references, ask for examples, make sure that you can speak to the leaders in the organization, and then run away if you don't have clear reporting. If they're not interested in seeing what the outcomes are, if they haven't, you know, if they haven't worked in your industry, if their branding, their look and feel doesn't fit, and then the hoarding assets is one that I love, and we run into every now and then, where, you know, they won't provide you with your files, you know, if you have written content or things like that. All right, so that brings us to our Q&A. I see that we've got a couple of questions in here.
Yeah, we do have a few questions. Do you need me to read them, or are you viewing them? I can read them for our guests. Maybe that's the best way to do it. I'll
sounds
start
great.
with the first one. What is the average cost for a small online retail business to get a website developed, and annual cost to maintain that site?
Man, that is a
Tough question.
broad question. So I don't know the average off of the top of my head. I will provide a few different directions that can be taken there. So extremely low cost is going to be a platform like Wix or Squarespace, and there are others popping up all the time. That's going to allow a small retail business to go in there and at least have a billboard, you know, so it's going to be like brochureware. You're probably, and then from there you can get into like a WordPress site. If you use like a visual composer and do it very, very simply for between $2,000 and $10,000, that's probably not going to get you into e-commerce. To get into e-commerce, you're probably looking at 8 to 50, and the difference there is going to be the size of your inventory, how much content you need developed, how much photography you need. Do you have all your projects, all your products? Do you have photography for all of them? So there's a huge, there's a broad mix there. And again, it's going to depend on what you want. Now, if it's a retail business, I think that you need to have something that's going to compete. In order to compete, you need to be able to compete with the Amazons of the world and try to get that traffic to your site instead of there, which means you have to have a positive experience. So, you know, we have seen people kind of try to bare bones it, and if that's going to be an e-commerce site, that tends to not work particularly well.
Right. Yep. I understand that. All right. The next questions revolve around the social media engagement. This person is asking if you see value in business being active on social media, even if they're not getting great interactive traction.
So yes, to a degree. I mean, so there is value in having a presence and just having links that point back to your site. You know, you are still getting those impressions. You're still getting some brand visibility there. So there's some value there. There certainly is a lot more value in getting some interaction. And so just kind of looking at the rest of that question about impressions alone, good enough reason to continue consistent posting, I would say yes. I mean, the net cost of posting is relatively low. And so if you're creating the content, then by all means, you should publish it to your social media. Some people are going to see that, and a few people are going to at least read it. So struggling to get more traction on social media. So advice for that, I would say make it as authentic as you can, where you can take a position, even if it's going to alienate some of your audience. Take a position instead of don't take a position, I guess I would suggest. And of course, there are limits to that. We can't push that too far, but you don't garner a response by just being kind of vanilla, and so try to push the envelope a little bit, go into some areas where you may not have the exact answer or where you're willing to engage in a conversation. I recognize that there is some risk in doing that, but I don't think that we're ever successful without taking some risk. And so I would suggest get a little bit outside of the box, get a little bit outside of your comfort zone, engage people, take a position, and just show your true authentic self. And sometimes that means taking something from an agency and pulling it in-house for the authenticity. I think that agencies in general can provide a good model on the social media side only if they're super, super plugged into the company. Beyond that, you almost have to have somebody who's in-house, who's managing some of that.
I appreciate the advice of being authentic. I do think that's good. Well, I don't see any other questions. Folks, if you have questions, please send them our way. I did not see any on Facebook. I forgot to ask if we could have a copy of your slides, Chip. We
Certainly.
post the slides on the website with the Zoom recording. So great content, a lot to understand. I guess my question for you would be, sometimes it can seem overwhelming for a small business owner to get started in social media if they don't have a website. Is it okay to crawl? Is it okay to start somewhere? Do you have to have it all to begin? Yeah.
No, you certainly have to crawl, walk, then run. If you're starting a business, start with your own personal social media profiles. So talk about what you're doing on LinkedIn, talk about what you're doing on Facebook, Instagram, take pictures of videos of what you're doing. We all have cell phones, these things have incredible cameras on them. The new iPhone 12 Pro especially has actually all of the new iPhones do, but what you can capture with those is just unbelievable. And people are interested in people, and so Facebook, LinkedIn, they've all realized that, you can monetize these audiences for a business, but less so for a person. And so if you're starting a business and you're going out and saying, hey, I'm going to go do this, then start out on your own social media profile, talk about what you're doing, share your stories, talk about your clients, your interactions, but do that on your personal. And that's where you're going to start to get more traction. Then as you see more traction there, then you can start to repost from your business what you're posting on your personal as it pertains to your business. So I think that's a good starting point, especially if you're like a sole proprietor.
Yeah, great. Good advice. So, well, thanks, Chip. We appreciate it. If you shoot those slides, we'll have everything on our website later today. Thanks so much for your time and your expertise. And thanks for everyone for joining us.
Thanks so much, Lori. Take care. Have a good day.
Bye.